Men, understanding the hidden tests women run on first dates isn't about manipulation. It's about recognizing that high-value women don't just evaluate what you say, they strategically observe how you respond to specific challenges designed to reveal your character, confidence, and compatibility before they invest emotional energy into something that won't meet their standards. Before we dive in, hit subscribe, smash that like and hype button, and drop a comment if you've ever failed a first date test you didn't even know you were taking. Your experience might help another man recognize these challenges and respond in ways that demonstrate the qualities women actually value in potential partners. Challenge 1. The conversation gap. Uncomfortable silence. To test your confidence, when she lets the conversation hit a natural lull and doesn't immediately jump in to fill the silence, simply sitting there calmly while waiting to see how you respond. To the uncomfortable void, she's not being awkward or struggling to think of something to say. She's deliberately creating conversational space to observe whether you panic and frantically fill the silence with nervous rambling, or whether you're comfortable enough in your own skin to let moments breathe without desperately performing for her. Approval. What this reveals. This reveals your baseline confidence and need for validation. Men who are secure in themselves can sit through brief silences without interpreting them as social failure or rejection. They understand that conversation naturally ebbs and flows, and that comfort with silence actually demonstrates stronger social calibration than constant talking. When you panic at the first pause and start word vomiting about random topics just to keep noise happening, you're revealing that you need constant engagement to feel secure, which signals insecurity that undermines attraction. Notice how long the silence lasts before she intervenes. If she waits 5, 10, even 15 seconds while maintaining eye contact and seeming perfectly comfortable, she's specifically testing your reaction to extended quiet. She wants to see if you'll crack under the pressure of a pause that most insecure men find unbearable. Watch your impulse to fill every gap instantly. If the moment conversation stops, you immediately launch into another topic without any pause. You're revealing you can't tolerate the natural rhythm of human interaction. You're performing constantly rather than relating authentically, which suggests you're more concerned with impression management than genuine connection. How to respond. When conversation naturally pauses, breathe. Look at her comfortably. Smile if it feels natural. Let the moment exist for 3 to 5 seconds before you speak again. You can even acknowledge it playfully. Nice, a comfortable silence. That's actually a good sign. This demonstrates you're not threatened by pauses, you're not frantically performing, and you're secure enough to let interaction unfold naturally, rather than controlling every moment through constant talking. Challenge 2. The preference pressure. I don't care, whatever you want. When you ask her opinion about something, where to sit, what to order, what to do next, and she responds with, I don't care, or whatever you want, despite obviously having preferences about everything in her life, she's not being genuinely easygoing or traditionally feminine. She's deliberately testing whether you'll take the initiative and lead decisively, or whether you'll continue deferring to her, seeking her approval, and revealing that you're not comfortable making decisions without permission. What this reveals. This reveals whether you are able to lead without needing constant validation of your choices. Women are observing whether you can make decisions confidently, or whether you need her to validate every choice before you commit to it. When you respond to I don't care by continuing to seek her input, are you sure? What do you feel like? You must have some preference. You're failing the test by demonstrating you can't lead even when explicitly given permission to do so. Notice how she responds when you actually make the decision. If you say I don't care, and she says, okay, let's sit by the window, and you immediately agree and move forward, she's shown she can lead when you won't. If you make the call confidently, and she goes along naturally, you've passed by demonstrating you don't need her to hold your hand through basic decisions. Watch whether this pattern repeats throughout the date. If every minor decision point results in her deflecting back to you, she's consistently testing whether you'll step into leadership or continue seeking approval. Multiple instances of whatever you think or I'm fine with anything are multiple opportunities for you to demonstrate decisive confidence or reveal its absence. How to respond? When she says she doesn't care, make the decision. Cool, let's sit here by the window. Better lighting. I'm going to get the tacos, they look great. Don't overthink it. Don't seek additional confirmation, just lead. If she genuinely has a strong preference, she'll speak up. If she doesn't, you've demonstrated you can make decisions without needing her permission or validation, which is exactly what she's testing for. Challenge 3. The controversial statement. Testing your backbone. When she makes a statement that's slightly provocative, unconventional, or potentially controversial, about politics, relationships, gender dynamics, or any topic where people have strong opinions, and then watches your reaction carefully, she's not accidentally bringing up divisive topics. She's deliberately introducing potential disagreement to observe whether you'll immediately agree with her to avoid conflict, or whether you're secure enough to express a different perspective respectfully when you genuinely hold one. What this reveals. This reveals whether you have a backbone or whether you're a people pleaser who'll agree with anything to avoid tension. Women respect men who can disagree respectfully because it demonstrates you have your own values and aren't performing agreeability to win approval. When you immediately agree with every statement she makes, even when it contradicts things you said earlier or obviously conflicts with your actual values, you're revealing that your priority is her approval rather than authentic self-expression. Notice if her statements seem designed to test your response. If she makes claims that are clearly debatable or says things that contradict obvious reality just to see if you'll challenge it, she's explicitly probing for whether you'll be honest or just agree to keep things smooth. All men are intimidated by successful women, or people who don't like dogs are probably sociopaths. Statements designed to invite either agreement or thoughtful pushback. Watch how she reacts when you do express disagreement. If you respectfully offer a different perspective and she engages thoughtfully, even with a smile or increased interest, she's rewarding your willingness to be authentic rather than performative. If expressing disagreement makes her hostile, you've learned something important about her ability to handle difference. And that's valuable information too. How to respond. When she makes provocative statements, be honest. If you genuinely agree, say so with real reasoning. If you disagree, offer your perspective respectfully. I see it differently. I think most men actually admire successful women, but might struggle with approach anxiety. You're not arguing to win or being contrarian for its own sake. You're being authentic. Women testing for backbone want to know you'll be honest with them rather than telling them whatever you think they want to hear. Challenge 4. The phone check. Testing your self-respect. When her phone buzzes with notifications during the date and she picks it up to check messages or respond to texts, rather than ignoring it or briefly explaining an urgent situation, she's not being accidentally rude or genuinely dealing with emergencies. She's deliberately testing whether you'll tolerate being treated as less important than her phone, or whether you have enough self-respect to address the behavior without being controlling or reactive. What this reveals your boundaries and self-respect threshold. Men who are confident in their value don't silently tolerate being treated as lower priority than a phone for extended periods. They can address it calmly and directly without being butthurt or controlling. When you sit there saying nothing while she spends 5 minutes scrolling through Instagram or texting friends, you're revealing that you're so grateful for her presence that you'll accept any behavior rather than risk her disapproval. Notice how extensive the phone usage is. Brief emergency check is different from repeated, prolonged phone attention throughout the date. If she's consistently more engaged with her screen than with you, she's testing whether you'll continue tolerating it or whether you'll establish that you expect mutual presence and respect during time together. Watch whether she offers explanation or acknowledgement. If her phone behavior is genuinely about an urgent situation, most women will briefly explain, "Sorry, my sister's dealing with something. Just need to check this quick." If there's no acknowledgement whatsoever that dividing attention is happening, the lack of explanation is part of the test. She's seeing if you'll accept being deprioritized without even minimal courtesy. How to respond. If phone usage becomes excessive, address it directly but calmly. "Hey, seems like you've got a lot going on. Do you need to handle something?" This acknowledges the behavior without being passive-aggressive, gives her opportunity to explain if there's genuine reason, and demonstrates you're not going to silently tolerate being deprioritized. If she says it's nothing important, you can add, "Cool, I'd rather have your actual attention while we're together." Direct, respectful boundary without butt-hurt energy. Challenge 5, the status challenge, name-dropping and comparison. When she casually mentions high-status people she knows, impressive experiences she's had, or expensive things she owns. "My friend who's a doctor, when I was in Paris, my Porsche, is in the shop," especially when these references seem strategically placed in conversation. She's not being accidentally boastful or genuinely just sharing her life. She's deliberately communicating social value and observing whether you'll be impressed and try to compete, or whether you'll remain unaffected and grounded in your own value. What this reveals. This reveals whether you're secure in your own status or easily triggered into validation-seeking behavior. Men who are confident in their value don't feel threatened by her status signals or compelled to one-up her with their own credentials. When you respond to her name-dropping by immediately trying to match or exceed it with your own impressive references, you're revealing that you're competing for status rather than relating authentically, which demonstrates insecurity about your position. Notice if the status references feel natural or strategic. If she's genuinely sharing her life, high-status references will come up organically as part of authentic stories. If every other sentence includes subtle demonstration of wealth, connection, or achievement without those details being particularly relevant to the story, she's deliberately salting conversation with status signals to gauge your reaction. Watch your own response pattern. If you find yourself immediately trying to demonstrate your own status, credentials, or connections in response to hers, you're being triggered into competitive display. If you notice feeling slightly defensive, inadequate, or eager to prove yourself, those feelings are exactly what the test is designed to surface. How to respond. When she signals status, acknowledge it naturally, without being overly impressed or competitive. "That's cool," or "Nice, how'd you end up in Paris?" Treat her status markers the way you'd treat anyone else's, with polite interest but not reverence or competition. Don't try to match her references or prove your own value. Your groundedness in response to her status signals demonstrates you're secure in yourself, regardless of what she achieves, owns, or knows. Challenge 6, the opinion test. Asking what you think of her. When she directly asks what you think of her, what your first impression was, or whether you're attracted to her. Questions that seem to invite compliments and validation. She's not fishing for reassurance or genuinely uncertain about your interest. She's testing whether you'll immediately provide the validation she's prompting, or whether you're comfortable playfully deflecting, creating tension, and demonstrating that your validation isn't given automatically just because she asks for it. What this reveals. This reveals whether your validation is valuable or freely distributed. Men who are high value don't immediately comply with requests for validation because they understand that freely given approval has no impact. When she asks, "So, what do you think of me?" and you immediately respond with earnest compliments about how amazing she is, you're revealing that your approval is easily obtained and therefore meaningless. Notice the directness of the question. When women are genuinely uncertain, they hint or create opportunities for you to compliment them naturally. When they ask directly, they're often testing your response pattern rather than seeking genuine reassurance. Direct questions invite either qualifying behavior or playful confidence. Watch how she receives different response types. If you give immediate validation and she seems satisfied, but not particularly more engaged, your compliance with her request didn't create attraction. If you playfully deflect and she seems more interested, your refusal to automatically validate created more tension and interest than compliance would have. How to respond. When she asks what you think of her, create playful tension instead of immediately validating. "I'm still deciding," or "ask me again at the end of the date," with a smile. You're not being mean or withholding. You're demonstrating your validation isn't automatically given just because she requests it. Later, you can offer genuine appreciation when it's not prompted, which makes it more valuable than automatic compliance with requests for validation. Challenge 7. The late arrival. Testing your response to disrespect. When she shows up 10, 15, or 20 minutes late to the first date without prior notice or with minimal acknowledgement of the lateness, she's not accidentally running behind or genuinely unable to manage her time. She's deliberately testing how you respond to disrespectful behavior, whether you'll be understanding to the point of having no standards, or whether you can address it calmly and establish that your time has value without being reactive or punishing. What this reveals. This reveals your boundaries and how you handle being devalued. Men who have self-respect can address lateness without being either passive or aggressive. When you greet her with, "No problem at all, I'm just glad you made it," after she's 20 minutes late with no explanation, you're revealing that your time has so little value that wasting it requires no acknowledgement, which establishes terrible precedent for how she can treat you going forward. Notice whether there's acknowledgement or explanation. If she shows up late and immediately addresses it with genuine apology and explanation, the lateness might be legitimate circumstance rather than test. If she shows up late and acts as though being on time was never discussed or expected, the lack of acknowledgement is deliberate. She's seeing if you'll accept being disrespected without addressing it. Watch your own emotional response. If you feel resentful but say nothing, that internal frustration will affect your energy throughout the date. If you feel genuinely unbothered because you use the time productively and don't feel devalued, that's different from performing unbothered while actually feeling disrespected. How to respond. When she arrives late without explanation, address it calmly and directly. "Hey, I get that things come up, but a heads up would have been good. I value my time." This isn't aggressive or butthurt. It's setting clear boundary that your time matters without making it a bigger deal than necessary. If she responds defensively or dismissively, rather than apologizing, you've learned something important about her respect level. If she apologizes genuinely, you've established mutual respect. Challenge 8. The investment test, making you work for everything. When every aspect of the interaction requires you to provide effort, entertainment, and energy, you ask questions, you drive conversation, you suggest plans, you create all the momentum, while she simply responds with minimal effort, laughs at your jokes, and generally acts as though her presence alone is her contribution. She's not being shy or feminine. She's deliberately testing whether you'll accept doing all the work for minimal reciprocation or whether you'll expect mutual investment in building connection. What this reveals whether you'll tolerate one-sided investment or whether you expect reciprocity. Women who are genuinely interested in someone don't just receive entertainment. They actively participate in creating good interaction through their own questions, stories, and engagement. When you're doing all the heavy lifting and she's coasting on minimal effort, she's either not that interested or she's testing whether you'll accept being the sole investor in building connection. Notice if the imbalance is consistent throughout the date. If you've asked her 20 questions and she's asked you 3, if you've shared multiple stories and she's shared surface-level responses, if you've created all the conversation momentum and she's simply reacting, there's clear pattern of one-directional investment that reveals either her lack of interest or her testing of your tolerance for imbalance. Watch whether she steps up when you pull back. If you reduce your effort level, and simply match her energy, responding when she engages, but not driving everything forward yourself. Does she let the interaction die through lack of effort, or does she increase her investment to maintain momentum? Her response to your reduced effort reveals whether she's actually interested in connection or just comfortable receiving your entertainment. How to respond? Stop doing all the work. Match her investment level instead of constantly compensating for her lack of effort. Ask a question, then wait for her to ask one back instead of immediately asking another. Share something, then see if she reciprocates with her own sharing. If she steps up when you stop carrying the entire interaction, she was testing your tolerance for imbalance. If the date dies when you stop doing all the work, she wasn't invested enough to contribute, and you've learned everything you need to know about her interest level.